Founder and editor in chief of Provoked magazine, Susan Dabbar has built a life defined by curiosity and fearless exploration. From 13 careers across 5 countries and 6 states to creating opportunities before they've even existed, Susan has approached every challenge as an invitation to grow. Her story shows that thriving isn't about avoiding change. It's about leaning into it, learning from it, and using it to create a path that is authentically yours. So today's conversation is about following your curiosity, embracing challenges, and building a life where your personality, visibility, and bold action create your influence and impact. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me here. And I'm so excited that you're kicking off this really needed platform. I love everything you've got going. I love your branding and the name that you've
Thanks.
chosen. And I know that you can bring such a light to this community.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate that. I think the coolest part of this, one of the coolest parts of the journey is my daughter who's in going into marketing. She actually created the name, she created the logo. So it's been an intergenerational development with a Gen Z. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, for somebody who has created a lot of logos and branding over the years, that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
As I'm a serial entrepreneur, if you will. I've had, seven, you know, you could count 7 honest businesses, and I've exited about 6 of them successfully.
Mm.
And it's, every few years or, my longest stint was 15 years, you build a brand, but building a brand or even making a move, reinventing yourself, taking a pivot is more than a logo, right? There's a lot more that goes into it as you're finding out. And I'm even trying to build now with Provoked because we started, from scratch just a year ago. But it's
Yeah.
all those steps that kind of come together to realize, your vision and your dream and the message or the mission of what you're trying to accomplish.
I couldn't agree more. But before we get to provoked, because I really want to touch on that, I'd like to bring you back to your 20s and maybe just start off with what was the hardest challenge you faced as a woman? And I know the environment you were in your 20s, particularly around your education, might have been a part of that.
Yeah, so I'll take you back even to my late teens because that really,
Right.
kind of pushed me to really was the pivotal direction of where I ended up in my 20s, and I grew up in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. My dad was a commercial fisherman. Neither one of my parents had the opportunity to go to college. My mom, was brilliant in a lot of ways, very complicated, but she lacked any of the opportunities that she wanted to make sure that I had. And as you know, they wanted to make sure that all 3 of their kids went to college, but they didn't have a lot of money. And at the time, the military academies had just opened their doors for women. And this was
Mm.
like 1976, 1977. I'm dating myself. And my mom thought, "Wouldn't it be really cool if you went to one of the academies?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen," kind of thing. And long story short, I ended up at State University of New York Maritime College, which is it is basically a military academy. It was back certainly in the late '70s, where it's a state university run merchant marine academy where you wear a uniform, and there were very, very few girls. There were 400
Mm.
young men in our class when I entered in 1978, and there were about 12 women. So right there,
Wow.
that was a really defining moment, right? It was something that I grew up with 2 brothers, but that was a whole different thing. And and studying engineering on top of it, which was certainly I was good in math and I knew that. But, engineering is a whole nother thing and studying it with being one of the only women, because there were within those 12 or 13 women that were in our class, only about I think there were about 5 of us that were engineers, so it was even a smaller number. And so that was really like that really set me off. So that's one of the reasons I have salty language. And I play poker really well, and I've written about that. And later on in my life, I actually played a little professional poker, and I understand men and how they make decisions, and that's helped me along my way. So there were a lot of things that really happened right at that very critical early 20s, and then
Mm.
when I graduated from maritime, I I wasn't sure what I was gonna be doing, long term, because back then, in your headspace, the idea was that you had forever jobs, right? You don't have
Yeah,
forever jobs anymore.
exactly.
But back then, you had forever jobs. And I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm gonna go work at a shipyard and design nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers," which is what I did. I had many job offers because I was one of the very few women who graduated with a degree in naval architecture, and I went down to Newport News, and this was now 1982 when we were right in the middle of the Cold War, and we were building submarines and aircraft carriers. So that's what I did, and when I was about 23, I guess, I was literally standing in the basin of a dry dock looking up at the bow of an aircraft carrier, which is beyond enormous. It's like
Huge,
standing in
right.
front of a skyscraper building, and I said to myself, "Susan, what the hell are you doing here?" Really. And I was in my steel-toed shoes and my hard hat, and I had, like, a tool belt on, and even though I was an engineer, I was there, I was inspecting and watching them, move the dry dock blocks, and I was like, this sounds weird, but I was like, "You're too pretty to be, like, standing down here in this dry dock, and, like, what are you doing here?" You know?
Yeah.
And so I at that moment, that was, like, one of my first aha moments that I still remember. It was that moment looking up at that ship and saying, "This is not where you're meant to be." And I just had a self-reckoning. And I went home that night, and I had just gotten married. I had married young, and married somebody that I had met at college who's still my husband to this day. We're almost been together now almost, what, 48 years or so.
Wow.
And I said, "I think that this is not gonna be good for me. I think that I need to do something different." And then that's when I really started learning the art of the pivot, and I started
Mm,
pivoting. For me, sometimes the pivots were like 30 degrees and sometimes they were 180 degrees. And from that job, I pivoted to doing interior design of ships. And because I went back to school at night and I got a degree in interior design, which has been a love of mine all through. And what hit me was I probably should have gone to school to be a regular like architect as opposed to a naval architect. But anyway, so that's sort of what happened in my early 20s. And I always had this restless sense because maybe I was a middle child and I was the oldest daughter. We're starting to read a lot about oldest daughter mentality
mhm.
and middle child. And I was always a little bit rebellious and a little bit, I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to go against like conformity. I also was born with an extra dose of confidence. I don't know really where that came from. Maybe my mom instilled that in me, or because I was the oldest daughter and the middle child. I just was like, I'm going to do anything I want and I can make it happen. And I've never let go of that either.
Okay. So there's so much that I would like to explore
Yeah.
in terms of your initial story that I think would really help any woman, but certainly younger women. First, tell me a little bit about what it was like for you and how you navigated being a woman in a very dominating male organization as well as a male field, because I don't think that's necessarily changed for a lot of women, at least the women I've spoken to, the younger women who say, "Sometimes I'm sitting at the table, I'm the only woman. Sometimes I'm in a field and there's not a lot of other women in there." So tell me how you navigated that, particularly at a time in our history when there wasn't this push for women to really use their voice. So tell me a little bit about what that was like for you.
Yeah, we talk a lot now about the phrase that I never even knew existed back then about taking up space, right?
Mhm.
Take your space. And that can mean everything from, metaphorically, physically, verbally. And I took up space. I'm 5'10". I'm big boned. I have blonde hair and I'm voicey. I'm a little loud. I'm not shy. And I think that that was an advantage, certainly being, walking into a boardroom because a couple years later I ended up at Disney, kind of in a similar, I worked for I've done I did a couple of things in those first or all through my 20s where I was in male dominated spaces. I went from being a naval architect at a shipyard to then working for a Navy research lab. And then I went on to Disney kind of thing. I know, weird segues, but they were all like pivot, 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 pivot. And in all of those circumstances, I walked into a room and I made sure that they knew that I was entering and that I meant business. Now, did I
Mhm.
conform? Did I wear like all the cute little 1990s, suits? And I had my, we were yuppies back then. I had my little sneakers and then I put on my heels and I had my little briefcase. But I sat at that table like I belonged there and I never let them see me sweat. And I, used my voice and spoke up and wasn't afraid to throw out an idea. And I was very fortunate, especially at Disney, where Disney really valued, even back in the early '80s, and I was often one of the only women there, but that they value creativity and they value an authentic voice. And I remember even, like the head of theme parks, like quieting a man down. How often does that happen even today? And like, I want her to speak. I want to hear what she has to say, pointing
Wow.
to me. And that was
Yeah.
that was really cool and really validating. So you do more of that when you get that positive reinforcement, and I was lucky to be in a few situations where I had that positive reinforcement. It didn't always go
Did
that way, but it
That's what
did
I was
then.
about to say. Was there ever Can you remember ever a moment when you were hesitant or afraid or just not sure if you should speak up and then you did? If you did,
Yeah,
can you tell me a little bit about
I
that?
think that still happens to me. I was,
Mm,
I was at a meeting, a few weeks ago, and it was almost all men, very, wealthy, very powerful men at a table, and I was sort of gaslit. I was sort of put in my
yeah.
place, like, the minute I opened my mouth, and it's still I wrote about it actually in one of my opening letters
I
in my
read it.
newsletter. Because I was so put like, even a week later, it was still like, "How the hell is this happening to me at 65?" I thought I've gone way past that, and I built my authority and my not that we have to have a right to speak or we have to prove ourselves to have a right to speak, but
Mhm.
that was really alarming that that still happens. But, over the years, I just really didn't allow it to. I just in my mindset, I never thought of me as being any different than anybody else. I never maybe that was naivety and that worked well for me. And I just came in like not one of the guys. I was never like one of the guys, but I came in like I have a seat at this table. I deserve a seat at this
Yeah.
table. I'm going to speak up if I feel like it. Maybe that's that overconfidence that I have.
Were your strategies around handling those situations all internal in terms of your mindset and how you, really prepared yourself from a cognitive level, or were there also some strategies you used for external control of the environment or the people in the environment?
That's a great question, and that's something later on I worked with, m a business that I had just most recently was college consulting, where I work with a lot of young adults, and I teach them even interview skills, and one of the
Okay.
things that really helped me was well, again, I have stature, I take up space physically, a good firm handshake from a woman goes a long way. I know that sounds maybe ridiculous, but even for men, a
Mhm.
lot of men, they'll tell you like they judge another guy by their handshake. And if a woman has a strong handshake, and I learned that early on, and that's something that I used to tell, I would tell my kids that I was mentoring, if you're going to meet somebody, you stand up, you shake their hand, you make eye contact,
Mhm.
you exude that confidence. Another thing is to be over prepared. I tend to be over prepared for, meetings. And if I'm, even if I don't think I'm going to say anything, I make sure I know who's going to be in the room if possible. I make sure I know their backgrounds if I can. And this is pre cell phones and pre, going way
Yeah.
back, and pre internet even. We didn't have the luxury of, checking everybody out and who's going to be there. But to find out what I could, get an org chart, whatever I needed to understand the hierarchy, where is the power in the room gonna come from? That's always a really good
Mm.
thing to know if you're walking in. If it's one-on-one is a
Right.
little different, but if you're walking into a room with other people at the table, who's in the position of power? Who's making the decisions? What kind of reputation do they have? What kind of decision making do they have? These will all help you, navigate that strategically, those situations.
It's funny, what you're talking about is something that I speak to people about, and they call it positive manipulation. And manipulation obviously has a negative context in our world and our society, but to me, positive manipulation is doing exactly what you did, which is getting the information, knowing the roles, knowing different aspects of people's personality or what they're doing so that you can then use that information to attain your goals. So it's not using anything against them in a negative way that would hurt them. It's using the information you have to really control the environment to the best of your ability, to the the most you can because you've done the research, because you've collected the information. So that sounds a lot like what you were doing.
Yeah, a great metaphor for that is throwing a good dinner party, right? So I love to entertain, but there's a real art, and I'll end up writing an article about this sooner than later, probably, about putting together a really good dinner party, right? You think about what guests, not everybody should know each other, but everybody should know at least one person. And then
Mhm.
you do your seating chart. Like I go to all of those measures, and you place people because you want the power to be distributed around the table. You don't want all four of your loudest, most extroverted power people at one end of the table, right? That would just monopolize that end of the table and the whole table would be lopsided. So it's the same, it's manipulating that data that you have or using that data
Right.
strategically to get the outcome that you're looking for, which for me is a successful dinner party where everybody feels welcome at the table. Everybody's voice is heard at the table. Even I had a dinner party here about a couple of months ago, and there were some pretty high-powered people at the table, and there were a couple of wives, and not to be certainly dismissive of the wives, but I'm like, how do I make sure that they don't get drowned out,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And make sure that the person next to them will engage with them and not think, oh, she's a housewife, so I'm not talking to her,
Mhm.
right? And I was very strategic about how I placed people around the table, I'm hoping that everybody walked away thinking, "Wow, that was like an awesome, like, dinner conversation," and everybody did join in and feel included.
Yeah. There's a power to that. There's that
Yeah.
I believe contributes to confidence. When you know everything you can know because you're controlling your information, you're controlling your behaviors through the data that you have. So after that, there's not a lot more you can do to control other people other than knowing what they're about and how you're going to respond to it instead of having to react to it.
Yeah, yeah, I think definitely, and that has, whether it's a gift or something that I've honed over the years, it has really, really served me well.
Yeah.
It's that confidence combined with having the information and sort of knowing what to do with it. And these are skills
Mhm.
that, not to switch gears on you, but like AI can't really teach you. These are skills that you have to get out and practice in the field, whether or not it's throwing a fun dinner for using the dinner party example, or sitting in a boardroom, or you're building a new team, or you're looking to pivot, like I did with Provoked, and build a team from scratch. And something going back to what I learned at Disney too is Disney really values collaboration and teamwork.
Mhm.
And in Disney, it was very important that when we built teams, we were mandated to make sure that there were people on our teams who made decisions differently, because there are different kinds of decision makers, you know
Mhm.
that, I'm sure, from your studies, and people who processed differently, so that you had this diversity coming in, so that you weren't in an echo chamber, and that the decisions were coming, um, they weren't coming in a steady, predictable flow, if you will. And that can be very healthy, especially when you're starting something new or creating something, that's in the creative realm. Those are all really, really healthy kind of habits.
Yeah. Now, you talked about having this confidence that you're not even sure where it came from, that it was you were born with an extra dose of it. For women who might not feel that yet, who might not be there yet, is there anything that you can think of that they could do to build that confidence, to develop the skills that you've been talking about so that they don't have to wait until they're actually in their role or in their career to start to practice it? What can they do ahead of time?
That's a great question. And I think about that often. I think one of the things is, first, surround yourself with people that lift you up.
Mm,
Surround yourself with other women or men, partners, wherever you can get people that will, even if you have one person, your ride or die, and start there, and make sure that, if you're really introverted, bouncing off of ideas of somebody that loves you and that is there to
Mhm.
support you is really helpful, and that can really help build your confidence. And then build your team out, and when I say team, I mean your personal team. Build it out a little bit and make sure that as that grows and you bring new people in, that they support you, because a little bit of support goes a long way in pushing. Even there are moments when I, doubt myself, like every night when I go to bed, when it's lonely and it's dark and I've worked a 15-hour day and I'm like,
Mhm.
"What the hell am I doing?" Like, "Oh my gosh," like panic, existential crisis. And then I'll scroll through and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I got the nicest letter from a reader today. Like, this is the best thing she's ever read." Like, that's really high praise. I don't know this woman, but it's like it comes in little tiny bits, and you have to believe in that. And a lot of us need outside, um, a pat on the back now and then, and that can go a really long way. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is just practicing. It's hard, but today with social media and everything else, like you can. There are a lot of ways that you can just force yourself to get out there, whether you
Mhm.
want to or not, and just do it. It's hard, but if you've got people pushing you and saying, "You've got this. I'm right here. I'm on the side. I'm waving at you. I'm making you smile. I'm making you giggle. You've got this. Go, Robin. You've got this."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love what you're talking about in terms of the collection of people. I call it my personal board of directors. They're the people I go to for advice, for feedback, for praise, all of it, because it's their praise is what's going to keep me going, and their feedback and their critiques are what's going to help me grow. And I trust them. They're, as you said, they're your go-to. So you feel comfortable with them. And hopefully you do get both sides, the good and the bad. And you and I were talking off screen, as I was preparing for this podcast, those are the people that I did my practice sessions with, because I trusted not only that they would support me, but they'd also let me know what wasn't working. And that's really an important balance to developing the confidence you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, preparation is almost everything, and just having that, knowing that, like, okay, I did 3 trial runs. I got this. It's gonna work. It's gonna be great. And my wing person is not far away, and I can call on them, to come, like, and help me. And you know what? If you have a boo-boo in the middle, again, it's like we're all real here, right? Like, life
Yes,
happens. Tech
exactly.
breaks down. God knows this magazine, it's more tech than anything else. I have tech issues every day. I had a meltdown yesterday, and it's okay. It's all overcomable, and it's almost like the more imperfection you show, like these days,
Right.
from a creator standpoint, it's almost the better, because people want to know that we're real, right? As you
Yes,
move
agreed.
forward with this podcast, they're going to want to know that you're real and that this is hard. Building something from
Yep.
nothing is hard work, and you're putting yourself out there so that the rest of us can feel included and be heard, and that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, I
But it's hard
agree.
work.
And you know this, I mean, between all the careers that you've had, but most recently with Provoked magazine, which the the start of it is just incredible to me, Susan, this idea, and maybe similar to what I'm trying to accomplish as a secondary benefit of the podcast, but a place where women 50 years and older, an age that society very often discounts us and says, our value is over because we've had the kids, raised the kids, supported our partners. So, really, what more is there for us? And you're creating a platform for these women. Tell me a little bit about how this really manifested for you.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for asking the question. First of all,
Yeah.
that I I had my last big gig was I ran this college consulting, educational consulting business. It started, with a suitcase, and I moved to a foreign country and I needed to pivot again. And that was about, well, now almost 20 years ago I started. I ended up staying in that business for 15 years, which was, for me, 5 years
A long
ago.
time
I
for
turned
you.
Yeah, that was my longest stretch. I did a few other little things in between on the side, but 15 years, 1 gig, that was a long time for me. And I loved working with those families. So between COVID and me turning 60 and starting to think about, like, longevity wise, like, how much runway do I have left if I want to
Mm.
do one more thing? And so again, I turned 65 years ago. And on that 60th birthday, I kind of said, I think I'm going to sell this business. And I had a couple of people that were interested, and I ended up selling the business that year. So then I took about a year or two. We were moving. We moved like two. We moved. I'm a serial mover also. We move, every couple of years. And I was, in the flurry of, redecorating houses. We did a complete refurbishment of one, gutted one of the houses. We almost did the other one. Anyway, that takes a lot of time. It's like a full-time project. So I kind of came up breathing when I was about 65, which takes me about 2 years ago. And I was like, okay, now I'm ready to settle down. What's it going to be? And
Mm,
I did a lot of studying, benchmarking, reading. What's missing? If I was going to enter into, let's say, a brand new market, again, wildly overly confident, wildly naive, but just like, I can do anything, right? I have some resources. I have time. I certainly have a 45 years plus of really good experience. I know how to run a business. I know how to build a good team. What 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 should I be leaning into? You
mm,
pulling all of those skills and what I like to do. I like to write, I like to create, I like to build communities. What feels good? So I started thinking about, a magazine, and I started checking out what's online, what's available for women. The seven sisters, if you call them, Women's Day, Family Circle, McCall's, they're all gone, they're all dead for the most part. And what do we have? We have AARP, we have the Ethel. Like, I don't read the Ethel. I'm never going to read the Ethel. No offense to the Ethel, but just their branding, their legacy branding is just kind of drags them down, right? Like,
mm.
I'm too cool for the Ethel, right? Where's the cool stuff for those of us that are older and still feel sexy and vibrant and want to read something that makes us say, holy shit,
Oh, yeah.
or pick up the
Mhm.
phone and say, Robin, you gotta read this. This is like, I've never heard this hot take before. What do you think of this? Is she like crazy, or is this the way I should be thinking about this? And I had this idea, and the name, one of my daughter's friends, I give her full credit. We were sitting at a little pizza bistro in London, actually. And I said, I need a name for this like new gig I'm starting. And she's like, well, you should call it Provoked by Susan, Susan, because you're one of the most provocative people I know. And you love to ask nosy questions. And so
Mhm.
that the name was, I literally opened GoDaddy that afternoon, and then it started. The other thing that I did that was really important is during that first summer before I even started writing, I joined a scary number of Facebook groups. Women over 50, women over 60, women over 70, cool women over 60, women that are retired, cool women over 70 that are retired, women that are on dating apps over 60. And
Yeah,
I tried to, I almost did like a cloud, if you will, of what are the trigger points? What's coming up most
yeah.
often? What are women talking about? What is the zeitgeist of women today of, midlife 50, 60, 70, 80s? What are they thinking about? What are they worried about? And there were a lot of common themes that came up, and I'm like, okay, those are my content pillars, if you will. That's what I'm going to start with. And that's how I started. Again, like, no idea what I was doing. Still don't.
Mm.
But here I am, a year
Well,
later.
what's interesting is it goes to one of the things that I know you live by, which is this idea of it's not who you know, it's who knows about you. And I think that what you're speaking to is this idea of, okay, you may have never done a magazine before. You were starting from a place of learning, but you started pulling in people, even people that you didn't know initially, who learned about you, could trust your personal brand to then trust your project, in this case, Provoked. Tell me a little bit more about this idea because I think that, women here, it's who you know and use the networking and make your connections so that you can get to your next achievement. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying it from a very personal, again, internal perspective. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you make a really good point there because, it is networking can be really important.
Mhm.
I don't know anybody in media. I have had no help from anybody yet, because for me, you have to build authority. If you're going to be a founder, you have to lean on something, right? Otherwise, people might have trouble following you. It could just be
Yeah.
enough passion for the subject for you to be an authority, right? There's a lot of different degrees and ways that you can exude authority. For me, I have a very interesting, eclectic 40-year experience of piecing together these disparate careers, everything from Disney executive to designing submarines to playing professional poker. Like, that's kind of like a showstopper, and everybody's like, "Wait, what did you just say?"
In
Like,
Russia,
really?
in Russia.
And in Russia, right? And I lived in Russia for 10 years. Like, that you can't all be all the same person, right? So I lean on that, right? I mean, none of it makes any sense when you pull it all apart, but when you kind of hear me talking about it and then you see me, you're like, okay, she's a little
Mhm.
off. Like, this makes sense. So I lean on that, as that was my story, right? So I figure if I build on my story and I just get 10 people to believe that I'm credible, then they'll tell a few people, and then I'll have 20 people. And that's literally how we started. We started with almost exactly a year ago with 0 followers, 0 subscribers. 0. Like, just me with an idea, that and a whole lot of like, damn it, I'm going to do this. And usually when I put my mind to something, like, I'm going to do it. And, I wrote the first 20 articles myself. I'm not a writer, but I'm not a bad writer, but I'm not a writer.
Mhm.
Most of my writers will tell you, you're not a writer. But it was like, it was a way for me to like get some, you launch a website, you have to have content. And I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like, I know more now, and I still don't know what I don't know, but I knew less then. And I don't make any bones about that. And when I started interviewing writers, I was like, I don't I've never been in media. And I use that, and I said to them very honestly, I said, I see it as a strength and maybe a little bit of a weakness. The weakness is that
Mhm.
I can't pull contacts. I can't call, the editor of Vanity Fair and say, "Hey, can you pop me a favor?" I don't have that access. I have nobody to call. But what I do have is, this inner drive and my own storytelling that I can share. And I'm a hard worker, and I'm willing to put in the time, and I know how to build a team. And I said, I think that one of the advantages is that building Provoked this first year, we've been able to work kind of under the radar. Like, and I say this with love, like, nobody's going to see us coming. Like, we're not quite there yet, but in another year or so, all of a sudden, it's going to be like, what is that publication over there, and where did they
Agreed.
come from? Who is that? And that's where I'm aiming my ship. That's where I'm
Yeah.
driving towards. It's like, all of a sudden we're going to be at 250,000, subscribers, or a million, which is, my goal in, 2 or 3 years. And it's
Cool.
going to be like, holy shit, how did that happen? Where did they come from? They're loud, they're noisy. How did we miss that? Because there is definitely a big enough audience, and we've really hit a nerve with the way that we, the stories that we tell, and the voice that we tell it in, which is provocative and a little poking. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
It does. I love this idea because, again, I think we are trained, and I'll speak from the female perspective, that you need to be competent, you need to have the skills, you need to be prepared. And yet you're saying, no, you actually don't. I mean, that's lovely if it happens and it comes in context or at the same time with this idea of your personality and letting people know who you are and not veering from your personality, staying on brand. Branding isn't just about your organization or your business or your product. It's about you. And that's been, it seems, the thread throughout everything you've done, Susan, which you alluded
Yeah.
to, that it's always been that I am confident, I am gonna do this. I might not always know, but I'll figure it out. And then when it no longer is bringing me joy or excitement, I'm gonna try something different.
Yep.
What would you
Absolutely.
tell women who are trying to get to that point? Like, what's the one mindset shift you would suggest to them to just start to just step into what they truly want, which is what you did?
Well, that's a big question. I think
Mhm.
that you have to really know yourself. You have to know enough to be ask yourself some tough questions. And I feel like there's a couple of things that come together. We can use the word purpose, although that can be a loaded, like,
Agreed.
do you have a calling? Is there do you want to serve a purpose? Do you have resources to serve that purpose? Is the timing in your life the right time to serve that purpose? Like, there are some very basic fundamental things. Like, it's great to say, like, like for me, like if I had said this when I was 30, I want to start a magazine for women because I'm really and I loved reading magazines back then, but in no way would I have been ready, would I have
Mm,
had the resources. I was right in the middle of raising, having kids and raising kids, so that would have been that would have been more difficult. So you have to be careful. It doesn't, you have to be careful and realistic when you're putting a plan together. Um, so that would be one part. But if you have something, and it could be something small, it could be, because again, that's why right now, across the internet, you see it all over Instagram. Um, uh, the creator uh, model is like, it's amazing. Like, you could be, a painter, and you could be starting a business because Instagram, social media allows you to do that. If you have that passion and you have that creativity and you're willing to put in the time, you can do almost anything. The other important thing to note is it's going to get harder and harder to differentiate yourself, especially if you're starting businesses that are what I call AI proof, if you will.
mhm.
Again, this is like another subject we could go off on for a long time and talk about, but when you own your story and you present yourself in a real authentic way and you build, like I am, kind of around a founder's story, that you can't, no AI can't come in and usurp that from me, right? There's no replicating that. Now, eventually, I want Provoked magazine to stand on its own and not be, oh, that's Susan's magazine, because eventually I will, I may, want to spin it off. I may want to sell it at some point. But for right now, and certainly not anytime in the near future, I'm the founder, and therefore there's more and more pressure on founders now. There didn't used to be. When I started my college consulting business, Admission Smarts, there was no pressure on founders. In no world would I go on and make a video and post it to the entire world. Like, that didn't exist. And I started, like, very similar to Provoked, with one client, and I grew it into an international business with 3 offices. And I started again naively, one client. I barely had the skills. I kind of went and got them, hurried up and went and got them and backed into them. But it was the same thing. It was just a passion that I had. I wanted to help young adults. I was at the right time in my life to do it. I owned a computer, which is all I needed from an infrastructure standpoint at that point. And so I did it.
I love that. Susan, I'd love to wrap up with just some rapid fire questions if you don't mind.
Oh boy. Okay.
Awesome. What's one life hack or tip that you use that you would offer to the audience?
A life hack or tip?
Mhm.
Mm, these are hard.
You like challenges, Susan, come on.
I mean, for me, oh, I'll tell you, take a nap.
That's a
Take a
good
nap
one.
when you feel like you need one. I have a video that's just gone viral in the last week. It's the second time I've run it, and it's gone viral both times. And it's about nap shaming and how
Oh,
women shame other women about taking naps. And I'm all about taking a nap. If I need a
yeah,
nap at 11 o'clock after we get off this call, or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I go take a
great.
nap. It might be
Me
15
too.
minutes, but
Mhm.
that's a power hack that has gotten me through the dark days and the light days.
100%. I follow that regularly.
Yeah.
What's one of your favorite books?
One of my favorite books. Oh gosh, this is gonna sound so corny. I'm a
No.
Pride and Prejudice girl, Jane Austen, anything that she wrote. Um, I I'm kind of fascinated. I was fascinated with Wuthering Heights for a long time, and even though it's been misinterpreted and reinterpreted, and with the new movie coming out, that was kind of interesting to
Yeah.
kind of dovetail those together. So, but Pride and Prejudice,
Okay.
classic.
What's one belief that you had to unlearn?
That your friends, the people that are really close to you, will support you, and sometimes they don't.
Got
And
it.
it's not because they don't wanna show up. For some reason, they can't quite make that happen. And I think that's sort of common when, if you're building something or you're out there and it's like, "Oh, look at me." And, it's easy to just press like on an Instagram post and they
Yeah.
don't press like. And it's widely talked about when especially with founders and building things. And sometimes it surprises you who shows up and who doesn't.
Agreed.
So when you're picking your
100%.
team initially, make sure you pick people who are going to show up.
Yeah. And then what's something that you do every day to take care of yourself?
Take a nap.
Every day. I love it. That's great.
I read even though I'm reading voraciously. I'm in 2 or 3 book clubs, so I'm always reading, like, on the side and very, like, disparate kinds of things that don't have anything to do with sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So reading for me is also a pleasure, like a hurry up, I gotta carve out 30 minutes before I fall asleep, before I'm too sleepy to read something.
Yep. Did you do both of those self-cares when you were in your 20s, the napping and the reading?
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
They've been kind of lifelong. Yeah. I'm really bad at exercising, so a lot of women would say that. I'm in the intern ex internal, eternal contemplation stage where I have all the gear and my dumbbells are sitting right over there collecting dust, and every day it's gonna be, "This is the day," and I'm really bad at that. I'm very self-motivated, but there are certain things that I'm not good at, and that's
Yeah.
one of them, sadly.
I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Yeah,
Susan,
yeah, I
I
don't know why
cannot thank
people
you enough for taking the time and just offering your experiences to the women who are building their lives in this world. I'm definitely going to add information about you and your projects in the show notes, and especially about Provoked, because one thing I want to point out to our listeners is while Provoked is written from the perspective of and for women over 50, every time I read it, I think this is a great article for my daughters who are in their 20s. And I have forwarded to them to say, You might want to listen to this. You might want to just keep this in the back of your mind because as you grow, you might find more understanding in it later on. But here it is right now. So I don't think it's just limited to women who are over 50 to follow you. I think it's really a valuable thing for all women. So thank you for that, Susan.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll just add that anybody is welcome to submit a pitch. We have an open door policy, and we try to be very democratic. It's competitive, but, if you have a story to tell, send it my way. I wanna hear it. We wanna publish it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful experience. I can speak to that. So,
Yeah.
to all of you, take what you heard today, carry what matters to you, and pass the wisdom forward. Because when women speak, the world changes. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on That's What She Said. Follow That's What She Said on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. That's What She Said is created, hosted, and executive produced by Dr. Robin Buckley. Our Senior VP of Productions and Content Strategy Consultant is Dr. Tom Grabowski. Jordan Gilbert is our show's Marketing and Creative Content Specialist. Senior Producer is Quentin Sukup. And remember to keep the conversation going. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're a woman who's lived it or a woman who's building it.